that was a big moment when I introduced Reagan to the microchip, and he introduced me to principles of leadership. Leaders have to listen; they don't just talk, and that was a key insight that Reagan imparted to me.
It's a
How to win.
great lesson for when leaders have to listen, not just talk. Let's empower the potential of all people to win by being uniquely who you are. And today, my guest is the renowned George Gilder, who is a very well-known economist and author of over 20 books, and known by many as a technology prophet. He's well recognized for books such as The Scandal of Money, Life After Google, and perhaps his most famous book from 1981, Wealth and Poverty, an exploration of supply-side economics during the Reagan administration here in the United States. I am thrilled to welcome him to talk with me here in Pasadena, California, where he's visiting for the week. George, thanks so much for taking time to speak with me.
Great to be here, Jimmy.
I know, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in a few years.
It's been a while.
I know. As we'll talk about, we got to know each other through common work in the Bitcoin and blockchain industry.
Yeah, that's right.
But we're here. You're my first ever guest on The Win Show.
Wow. All right.
Number one, you're a big win. And my whole purpose is to talk with really interesting people like you around the world, to hear about your life story and career journey, and hopefully teach the audience out there some interesting lessons about how they can win in their own journey. Okay. So let's begin. Let's talk about you first. A lot of people know you from your book work and your lectures, but where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
Well, my father was grandson of Louis Comfort Tiffany, the
designer,
glass and Tiffany and Company and everything. And at Harvard was editor of the Crimson and a flamboyant figure. When Roosevelt, FDR visited Harvard for its 300th anniversary celebration, my father emblazoned the editorial on the front page of the Crimson saying, "Let the presence of this man in the White House at a time of Harvard celebration serve as a useful antidote to the natural overemphasis on Harvard's successes." So he was and after graduating from Harvard, his roommate was David Rockefeller, of all things. They went to Germany just in a kind of tourist visit in 1936, and he saw Hitler. Wow. And he just said he knew this guy had to be stopped. So he devoted the rest of his life to trying to stop Hitler. He decided technology would solve the war, would decide the war, and air power would rule. And so he began civilian flight training so he'd be ready. And he was one of the first pilots to lead a squadron of flying fortresses across the Atlantic. And those first B-17s, they tried to combine bombing and fighting functions on one plane, so you didn't have to have fighters, and they couldn't make it across the Atlantic. And so I lost my father, my mother was a pianist and a musician, and she's the only pianist who played a concert with Yo-Yo Ma after the age 100 years old. She was a great lady, she married the first cousin of my father's when the first cousin came back from the war. And they decided to be farmers. So I was brought up on a dairy farm in a really, in New York, it was Tiffany and Rockefeller and all this, but my actual life was milking cows and throwing hay bales and digging, plowing fields. And, I really was a farmer, and that's how I've got the disciplines that really have been important to my life. I mean, I like working and I keep at it, and I learned how to keep at it on those getting up at 5 a.m. before school to milk the cows with milking machines, but you still had to do a lot of stripping and a lot of shoveling manure, and it was an educational youth.
How did you get from farm life to the worlds of economics and now technology?
Well, at Harvard, I've met a friend named Bruce Chapman, and I at a meeting of the Rockefeller for President Club, and at Harvard. And as we were walking out, this is Nelson Rockefeller running for president way back in the 1950s and 60s, and I walked out with Bruce, and Bruce said, "Hey, heck with the Harvard students for Rockefeller. We'll form national students for Rockefeller." So this was kind of a lesson in how to win, and nobody paid any attention to Harvard students for Rockefeller, but Bruce and I became national figures through national students for Rockefeller. We had clubs all across the country. Some of them were fake, and we got manipulated, but we made our mark, and started a magazine called Advance, which was Progressive Republican magazine, and then when the Kennedy assassination happened, we decided to write a book about politics, which was called The Party That Lost Its Head, about the Republican Party under Goldwater. So I wrote a book this was age 22 or something, and it was published by Knopf, and a leading publisher, and Random House Knopf, and it was a respected book, and so, I was always rebellious, like my dad, the sort of pure progressive Rockefeller scene didn't satisfy me, and so I wrote a book called Sexual Suicide, which was kind of a case against feminism back then, and it's been republished this year together with A Story of My Life by Canon Press, and it's together with a movie, so that's. The movie is Sage Against the Machine, and that's me. I'm supposedly against the machine, but I like nano machines and micro machines. I've been an exponent of electronic future, but that really happened after I wrote Wealth and Poverty, which was a worldwide bestseller. I mean, it just... President Reagan handed it out to all his cabinet, and when President Reagan was shot and was in the hospital bed, and Bob Dole who was minority leader in the Senate, came to visit him in the hospital. He gave my book to him and on camera. And this was, so my book was, it just, nothing could go wrong with wealth and poverty. And I figured I'd done economics. So I decided to write about technology. And because during the course of writing Wealth and Poverty, I read an article in Time magazine. That was the chief source of my knowledge of silicon chips back in 1960s and 70s, and well, really 80s, because Wealth and Poverty came out in 1979, 80. So I wrote, so I started studying semiconductors, and went to Ben Rosen, who was head of Seven Rosen Investments, a big, and wrote the leading chip letter of the day. It was the Rosen Electronics letter, and I asked him for a free subscription. And Ben, who this great magnate, leant back and said, "Gilder, you don't understand anything. You don't know the first law of newsletters. No free subscriptions."
That's the first law. Yeah.
But how would you like to write it? If you wrote it, you would have the equivalent of a free subscription. So, and I didn't know I knew the Time magazine. I knew the sort of superficial facts of chips, but I was not an expert. And here I was being asked to write the leading newsletter in electronics. And I really had to drill in. But I didn't say no. I said yes. And so there I was with an economics background. I'd studied economics. I admired John von Neumann and for his game theory, but I really didn't know anything deep about physics or chemistry or electronics, or this was not my field, and I had to learn it under fire, writing these newsletters every month that everybody read, because Ben, they purported to come from Ben, and Ben was becoming a venture capitalist and started MozTech with the big memory chip corporation. He was a giant in the field, Ben Rosen, back then, and I was representing him on the newsletter, and I did it, and I learned it under fire with, and I made mistakes, and I learned that mistakes are very instructive and useful to human progress, and ultimately you can only win if you are willing to make mistakes.
Bingo. I think that's an excellent point to keep in mind. I think we're all trying to always be successful, but you're right. Some of the biggest advancements I've made personally and in my career have come from mistakes and learning from them and seeing them as ways to win. Let's talk about why you're so prescient, so foretelling of technology. You've been called by many people as a technology prophet. How do you think you've been able to predict early so many technology trends and get people interested in them, or even work and invest in projects yourself on them?
Well, I think that experience with the Rosen letter, and I learned to see the big picture. I mean, I really, I probably shouldn't go back to Wealth and Poverty again.
Please do.
But when I wrote Wealth and Poverty, it was almost magical. I had studied game theory a bit. I'd studied under Kissinger at Harvard, and I was interested in history and writing. But I really didn't even know economics. I mean, I never studied economics at Harvard. And here I wrote this book, which it helped that I wasn't completely dominated by all the prevailing models of economic analysis. Most of them are wrong in the first place. The 50s and 60s were really a reactionary period. You know, we had 90% tax rates. I mean, it was just a bizarre aftermath of the catastrophic Roosevelt years, which took a stock market crash in 1929 and turned it into a 10-year depression. The Great Depression was not necessary. It's this kind of big picture that I could see about economics that allowed me to write this supply side text.
Right.
And then allowed me to see the big picture, not get all completely absorbed in the details and the intricacies and the conflicts and debates of the existing industry, but see that the existing industry is going to give way to a new industry and the whole history of the unfolding course of technology. And so I was always looking for what was going to precipitate a new system, and the microchip seemed to me to be a fundamental breakthrough from before every technology was all involved in pushing and pulling matter from the outside, exerting force on matter. And I saw that the microchip involved manipulating matter from the inside.
Right.
And this insight, which I told President Reagan, by the way, this was one of my famous moments back in 1980s, was introducing Reagan to the microchip. And
What was his reaction?
I actually took a mic when I was invited to discuss SDI to Reagan after I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal on it. And I was summoned by Colin Powell to the White House and I brought him a microchip. I think it was either a 16K or a 64K micron dynamic random access memory. I was writing about micron technology.
And what was President Reagan's reaction to
And Reagan really responded. He was fascinated. We talked for half an hour. I've talked to a bunch of presidents over the years, and the fascinating thing about Reagan was he listened. The others smiled and blandished and patted you on the back. Reagan didn't do those things so much. He just listened and had ideas. It was really it's really I learned the difference between a pal and a leader when I gave a microchip to Reagan. He was fascinated, and we discussed the impact of microchips on missile defense and SDI, the possibility of SDI. People were saying it couldn't be implemented because it would take such huge software systems that they could never be depended upon. And so instead, Reagan was that I said that chips could be in every interceptor, that chips allow the distribution of intelligence, which has been a basic insight that applies today to artificial intelligence. All the idea that it's always a singularity in one big data center is really the big mistake, and the same mistake that was being made back in the mainframe era of IBM. Any case, so Reagan, that was a big moment when I introduced Reagan to the microchip, and he introduced me to principles of leadership. Leaders have to listen; they don't just talk, and that was a key insight that Reagan imparted to me.
It's a great
How to win.
Great lesson for win. Leaders have to listen, not just talk. So now let's jump from Reagan and microchips to Bitcoin and blockchain.
Yeah.
How you and I first met, which was, of course, a significant portion and topics of your book, Life After Google.
Right.
Tell me how you got interested in exploring the phenomenon that is now Bitcoin and blockchain.
Well, it was the scandal of money.
Your prior book before that.
Yeah, it was. That was my first book on blockchains, and I interviewed Nick Szabo and really got deep into the intricacies of blockchain as a remedy for the collapse of money that I saw. I mean, today what we have is governments all over the world taking over the money and making money into a just manipulative tool of government power. And, money rather than actually figuring out how to run your economy, you just issue new money to accomplish anything the politicians seem to believe desirable. Change the climate, whatever. And so I got, it was really my understanding that moving money off gold, gold was money. So money all around the world was an objective thing. It was all convertible into gold in various rates and levels. And the scandal of money was that it got taken over by the politicians and the central bankers who just were tools of the politicians. So I was looking for a way to escape this terrible dilemma where money, which the whole economy is valued according to these currencies, was becoming a meaningless figment of the fancies of politicians. And blockchain was the remedy. Time-stamped transactions, all without a national sponsor or a national manager, was a route to escape from the dilemma of the scandal of money.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And you hit an important point, which I always like to remind audience members about when I talk about blockchain and Bitcoin. All a blockchain is, for people who don't really understand it, is what you said, time-stamped transactions. It is a distributed timestamp server. That's actually the phrase used in the Bitcoin white paper, not even blockchain, where you are timestamping an order of transactions, me sending a payment to you, me transferring title of a vehicle to you, any type of event or transaction, timestamped, distributed, published to the world to see, so that no one person, like a government or bank, is in charge of the record of history, and therefore we can trust it more. That's
Trusted
what got you right.
Transactions.
Yeah. And so as you explored, you interviewed Nick Szabo, who's one of the early people in the digital currency space. Who else have you interviewed and talked to about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
I've talked to Jimmy Nguyen.
Yeah, that's right.
I learned how to win, and of course I met Craig Wright, and I've had a tumultuous time with Craig Wright over the years, and I think he did the inventors of blockchain, not Bitcoin, but blockchain, were Haber and Stornetta. These are two. One was at Stanford, Haber, and Stornetta was, I think, University of Pennsylvania, something like that.
Talking about Stuart, Haber, and Scott Stornetta.
Yeah, and they were really inventors of the blockchain, and they didn't figure out quite how to do it, but they conceived the concept and wrote the paper, and I met with them with Craig Wright. And Stornetta and Haber really pretty much endorsed the idea that Craig Wright was instrumental in the development of Bitcoin. And I got engaged with Craig. I spoke at various conferences with Craig Wright. And this was controversial, but I learned a lot, and I met you, and it allowed my views of Bitcoin to evolve. Now Craig has fallen on his sword, apparently, his sword being a legal suit always. And this was, I think, his great mistake, his great failure. He thought everything could be solved in court.
No,
and in business, you don't win in court. Court, at best, is win-lose, or it's
the lawyers win.
The lawyers win.
Yeah.
Win-win is in business and enterprise and opportunity and creativity and learning and new technology. That's win-win, and so that's what I'm devoted to today.
Same here. I absolutely agree with you. I was never a fan of all those lawsuits, and I believe that the true wins in industry and technology come from building relationships and collaboration, not attacking an entire industry. So it was definitely not something I ever supported, and it's time to move on to productive things. I'm curious what you think of the Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain industry today as it's growing.
I think it's...
is it achieving the goals you envisioned of creating a more trustworthy money or value exchange system?
Global money.
Is it?
It's. I think it's part of an evolutionary process, and technologies tend to start in ways that are not always totally commendable or totally optimal. Chips and computers really took off in games, and NVIDIA, which is now the leading company producing chips and computers and even software for artificial intelligence. This is Jensen Huang's NVIDIA, which is based on technology from Bill Daly and Caltech, where I'm visiting right now. And so I just see Bitcoin as a developing project, but the fundamental blockchain of time-stamped trust layer for the internet is still ahead of us. And as we were talking before about what's called Web 3.0, this is the best way to conceive of Web 3.0. It's really that it has a trust layer, that it's not dependent upon politicians to determine outcomes.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't really know what Web3 is, how I define it is a new evolution of the internet where we don't depend as much on intermediary service providers like a Google or a Facebook that are controlling our login identity, store the content and data that we publish to the internet, but instead that's stored on blockchain, where you can control your own identity and your own content and data through your own private keys on a blockchain. And you're authorizing services such as a Facebook or a Twitter or Google to access the identity, data, and content you control yourself. So that requires blockchain, and that's a world I know
This
you'd
is
like
a
to
revolution
see.
that you're describing, and it's a great idea. And I think we're moving toward it. Just as Jensen Huang producing chips for game machines now ends up ruling the world economy with NVIDIA. It's an amazing transformation, and blockchains are preoccupied now with meme coins and various trivia and Shibu Inu and all these doges, all that stuff.
Lots of dogs and cats.
But I like render token, RNDR, which was created by Otoy Company, one of which I helped found, and is a really useful way of harvesting all the unused computer graphics processing units, GPUs, that are on everybody's computer that are not used 90% of the time. They're only occasionally used, and they can be harvested using graphics, using render tokens or other. You told me a pin. What was it?
Yeah, there's a render, which you've talked about, which I'm glad you brought up, is an early type of project that is using what we now call DePIN. Now it has an acronym like everything in the crypto world, which stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Network, creating blockchains, crypto projects, or other systems to bring down the cost of computing power or data storage by distributing it.
So and making it more reliable and trustworthy. So the whole, for render tokens now is, it's been the fastest advancing coin in the world for months because it can harvest GPUs, which are short and costly, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for these centralized data centers, and it can be harvested for render tokens from just, and thus providing a new basis for distributed artificial intelligence, not a singularity where there's only one answer in the world and in some gigantic data center in the sky that's ultimately a new technological divinity that's being cultivated. Instead, we have the possibility of intelligence distributed as widely as human minds. And human minds still, we have thousands of times more connections in our brain than the entire global internet.
Right.
And we run on 12 to 14 watts. The global internet runs on gigawatts and increasingly terawatts. That's trillions of watts. We're 12 to 14, and there are 8 billion of us. And this idea that AI is going to usurp human minds in some singularity propagated through the universe is a bizarre modern religion that's going to be discredited with the rise of distributed and real intelligence through the new web. They call it Web 3, but the ultimate web of human intelligence.
That's a great vision. Also, with DePIN, things like render, We can reduce the cost of computation services, data storage, and our intelligence services to hopefully democratize access to AI and human intelligence more. So it doesn't depend on just expensive cluster server hardware at the big tech, cloud service companies like Amazon and Google. What do you think of AI? There's been a lot of obviously attention on it the last couple of years, especially with generative AI. How you've watched technology wave for most of your life? What's your reaction to it?
I've written 3 or 4 books. And
yes,
I wrote a book just
a few years ago, Gaming AI.
Right? Gaming AI.
Is it unfolding as you thought, or differently?
No, it's unfolding faster than I thought, but in part because they failed to solve the critical problems. Hallucination still is a fundamental problem with AI, and people like it the more it hallucinates. It becomes more successful the more it hallucinates, because people don't really want reality. They want political correctness, or they want to affirm their own fancies. They don't. So AI is favored to the extent that it's unreliable. I mean, people choose, and ChatGPT, the open AI, the big AI, large learning system, large language, people prefer a temperature of 0.8, and the temperature of the AI gauges how reliable it is, really. How many random numbers have to be generated in the system in order to make it produce outcomes that people like. And 0 means it's completely accurate. It's a completely rendition of the real answers that the AI system yields. But they can't sell it at 0. 0.1 is completely random, but 0.8 is what ChatGPT's temperature. And that means that it's deliberately hallucinating. Everybody speaks of hallucinations as a problem, but it's hallucinations that make it so exciting, and with all these unexpected images and all these wonderful verbal confections that actually are fundamentally just statistical figments. So I think AI has got a way to go. I just at Caltech last night, one of Carver Mead's old students is setting up a company, who's had several successful companies in his past, is setting up a new company to solve the hallucination problem. And I wish him the best, but it's kind of a fundamental problem. I believe the solution, there's no solution to having one singular AI in the sky or in 100 data center complexes around the globe. That's artificial disaster. And AI has to be distributed. It has to be in everybody's cell phone before it's in the cell phone, not dependent on some filter to some data center run by one of the megacorps that dominate our economy.
So we need to really guard what is reality, especially in this world of AI generated.
And realities can't be guarded as one thing. Reality is hugely multiple.
Of course.
And the best way is to have those 8 billion human minds operating at 12 to 14 watts and in control of reality and projecting it toward their own particular futures. They want to win, and allowing individuals to win is critical to human civilization, while allowing a machine to win and dominate is the ultimate catastrophe. So I think we're going to have distributed AI and
Absolutely.
and I hope render tokens, RNDR, actually helps this ascent of a real AI, of real intelligence rather than artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and I think that's really an excellent point about ensuring that all this new technology empowers the potential of individual people across the world to win and doesn't overtake us. So you are a big technology, trend predictor, and earlier we talked about your early study of microchips. Now you are really interested in a new emergence of other technologies in the physical space, which is graphene. Tell us about your interest in graphene and where you see that going in the future for wins.
Well, I think graphene is going to be a big winner. Yeah. If you want to win, you plight your trust to this new material, the strongest material ever discovered, 200 times stronger than steel, 1,000 times more conductive than copper, the most heat transmissive material ever discovered at a time when all our data centers and technologies are really fraught with heat, which is really an obstacle to successful computation. And so graphene is a single layer of carbon atoms. It's you all use it all the time when you use a lead pencil. If you could just inscribe a line of from your pencil that would be too small for you to see, you might be able to lay down graphene. You actually, when you use a lead pencil, you're using graphite, which is trillions, quadrillions of layers of graphene. And nobody believed until 2000 or so that graphene could be produced in volume, and that it was believed that if you had a single layer of graphite, it would just fall apart and or agglomerate. It just a single two-dimensional layer. But as it turns out, this is 5 Nobel Prizes have been won. There are 40 for the last 17 years since graphene was really first characterized for the Nobel Prize for Gaiman Novoselov in England. There have been 40 peer-reviewed papers a day ever since then, and a whole bunch of Nobel Prizes for topological physics, which is needed, a new kind of physics that's needed to explain how this single layer of graphene has these immense capabilities, and it superconducts on the surface. And ultimately, there's a scientist at Georgia Tech named Walter De Heer, who is just in a major paper with a bunch of his Chinese students in a major paper in Nature, has reports the creation of wafer scale, that's integration of graphene on silicon carbide wafers. Now, silicon carbide which is the material that's used in all power semiconductors, electric cars, and anywhere you need a power semiconductor, it's pretty much sure to be silicon carbide. So silicon carbide is abundant everywhere, and they've learned how to sublime out the silicon from the top layer of the silicon carbide and create a perfect graphene film that can potentially be a wafer scale integrated circuit. In other words, rather than taking the current technology, you create a boule of silicon, you slice it, you make wafers, you then inscribe them with these gigantic machines that cost $350 million for extreme UV signals, and it's just and then after you inscribe the wafer, you then dice it into hundreds or thousands of little slivers of silicon. You send them off to Asia somewhere to get them packaged in separately in plastic packages. Then you send them to somewhere else to get them implanted on printed circuit boards before they're boxed in computers or cell phones or whatever use. Wafer scale means that you put a single integrated function on a whole wafer. It can be as big as 12 inches wide in current silicon technology, and if that wafer is graphene, it can run it's so pure in a two-dimensional material and so noiseless that it can run in the terahertz. That's trillions of hertz electronics rather than gigahertz, which is what silicon tops out at. And so it's a whole new foundation for electronics, vastly more efficient than the prevailing silicon paradigm. And this is why I may call my next book, I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but it may be Life After NVIDIA.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good title. You like your Life After titles.
Life After NVIDIA. I think I may be the Life After guy. Yes. And as I approach my afterlife, I'm writing Life After books, so people know what I think even after I'm gone.
That would be great.
That's the win. That's the ultimate win for me.
That is the ultimate win, yeah, to let your thoughts and impact on the world live on forever. So you've had such a wondrous and long and varied career. I want to use our remaining time here to talk about what lessons you've learned from it and what we can teach our audience about how they can win. What are the things you think you've done in your life and career that have most been impactful in leading to the biggest successes you've had?
You know, that wealth and power, I believe that science does not understand even the electron. I mean, I've been at Caltech for most of the last week with all the leading experts in the world on the electron, and they don't know what the heck it is. You know, is it positive? Is it you know, it's a mystery. Ultimately, we don't know what an electron is. It can be two places at once. It spreads across the universe, and yet it's a particle in a particular. It's the scientific understanding of the electron is just a mystery. So, and a paradox. And I believe that that it's crucial not to exaggerate what we know. When we think we know, that's when we're probably deceiving ourselves. And our lives are engulfed in a great mystery and a higher purpose that we can't know. It's something we got to feel and allow to govern us ultimately, and I think that's the lesson, and that's what I've learned from my adventure here.
I like that you said we have to feel, because one of the things I say a lot in my speeches and talks across the world is that wins come from both innovation and inspiration, technology and heart. And a lot of that requires a first step of understanding who you are, what you care about, what motivates you, what inspires you. And that's about feeling. And I think in professions and in career, we're often not told to feel. And I think feeling what is right, what we care about, is so key to success.
And you really aren't going to get it from an AI machine, are you?
Not at all.
You need a heart and a mind.
So I know you lost your father when you were relatively young, but are there any memories or lessons that you've learned from him, or the life that he led, which is using technology to try to win a war?
Yeah, I learned that. I learned 10 years after I wrote Wealth and Poverty. My uncle found in the attic of his house a copy of a book my father was writing when he died, and that book was about intangible capital and really could have been entitled Wealth and Poverty, or The Spirit of Enterprise. It was amazing, and I kind of imagine that somehow he guided me to write Wealth and Poverty and change not just my world, but the world with its publication.
How do you think that book most changed the world?
Well, it really did launch supply-side economics. People now are still, if people feel they need to attack a concept over and over, just constantly and obsessively, it's pretty sure that it has a kind of durability and truth that they don't want to face. And supply-side economics is like that. It's true that lower tax rates yield more revenues than high tax rates. It just is true. And it's true that technology is advancing far faster than any of the economic data suggest. All inflation figures, GDP figures, all these numbers that preoccupy Washington are almost devoid of real meaning. In Life After Capitalism, I celebrate a book called Superabundance by two professors who are following up on William Nordhaus of Yale's discovery of time prices. And Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize, and he's a great figure. And time prices show the way to evaluate the cost of goods and services is by the amount of time a typical worker has to spend to earn the money to buy them.
Sure, right.
And that time projects economics. You can compare early eras to late eras, countries around the world. Time is a universal gauge of value, and using time prices shows that economic progress continues at a pace 5 times faster than the GDP figures estimate, and we're in an era of an efflorescence of creativity, and sadly, most of economics is preoccupied with central bank interest rate policy and GDP numbers. And GDP, one thing, all you got to know about a GDP number is it values all government spending as worth what it costs. So, and you know that when government is just pumping out money and throwing it around, it's not worth what it costs. And so this exaggerates the value of government all around the world and vastly underestimates the value of entrepreneurial creativity at places like Caltech, where I've just spent much of the last week. And this is, I'm still learning at this point, and Life After Capitalism really develops these theories.
Which is your most recent book. And I think it's interesting that you said that, your most successful, famous book, Wealth and Poverty, really carried ideas that your father had started writing without you knowing. Do you think that was destined?
I think it was destiny. It was a big win for me, and I think for him.
Oh, yeah, because you allowed his ideas to come to the world even after he was gone. I guess my last question for you is, what are some big wins you still want to achieve for yourself? And what do you think it will take to achieve them?
Well, I've got 4 grandchildren now, and I'm gonna have a boy. I'm gonna have another boy. I've got one boy grandchild, and I got another grandchild coming soon. My son Richard and his wife Irene are gonna have a boy. We went to a gender reveal party.
Oh yeah, that's hot.
So
that's very woke of you. Gender
we know
reveal
it's
party.
a boy, and so that's exciting. And I like to. I mean, family is very important to me, and
that's the ultimate win.
And it's the ultimate win, yeah. And so that's win-win.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end, which is, there's all this desire we all have to, have successful lives and careers and make an impact on the world. But, as I spend now more time, hopefully off the road, as you know, I've been a big global traveler, and spending more time in the U.S. with family and friends, I feel like it's important to reconnect with the things that really matter. Great, we want to bring technology to the world and help people, but the loved ones who give you feeling in your life, I think that's what really lead us to where we're meant to go and true wins in life. So on that note, I want to thank you, George, for sharing this time to have this conversation with me. It's so good to see you and talk to you again after a few years where we haven't seen each other. I want to wish you so much luck in all your future endeavors, and I'm sure we'll have future conversations.
Hope so.
With that, this is Jimmy Nguyen, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Nguyen Show, where we'll continue to talk to global leaders about lessons in their journey on how to win in life, career, business, and whatever, because we want to empower the potential of everyone across the world to win by